Welcome to the Farmhouse. I'm Stephanie Spiker.
And I'm Candace Wierzbowski.
Today we're going to be talking to Sue Bowman. Sue is a longtime contributor and columnist here at Lancaster Farming. She writes a weekly column called Rural Ramblings, which you can find in our B section and also on our website. There she discusses life on her cow-calf operation in Lebanon County, Pennsylvania. She's also one of our go-to correspondents for local feature stories, especially ones that have a historical topic. But before we bring Sue into the farmhouse, Candace and I have a couple little treats for you.
That's right. So our first little treat is a recent story from friend of the podcast, Shelby Watson-Hampton. It's titled, Why Farm Women Should Pay Attention to Their Own Biological Cycles, and it's currently available at lancasterfarming.com. In this story, Shelby makes what I think is a pretty good point, and that's that farmers pay close attention to the natural biological cycles of their animals, and rightfully so. But we don't always pay that much attention to our own cycles. So if you take cows, for instance, farmers know that you need to adjust how you're caring for newborns versus lactating mothers versus animals that are being finished. But as women, we often aren't aware of the fluctuating needs in our own body as we move, throughout our lives. So like the fact that, we're more prone to iron deficiencies during our menstrual cycle, or the fact that our changing estrogen levels can, affect our sleep patterns throughout our lives. These are things that are largely unexamined and really not considered. And it's a fascinating read. I highly recommend it. And it just begs the question, why don't we pay as much attention to our own health needs as we do the animals on our farms?
Yeah, it really is an interesting read, and it makes you think a little bit, for sure.
Yeah. She also asks, we learn these things or some of these things in health class growing up, but we don't ever really check in that much as we continue to grow older, and perhaps we should.
Yeah. All right, so our second little treat is going to take us out to New Jersey. So back in October, I got to go to New Jersey to Lee Brothers Inc., a cranberry farm, and I was really given the VIP treatment by Jen Lee. Jen and her brother Steven are the 6th generation on the farm, and while Jen has a full-time job off the farm, during their busy harvest season, she spends pretty much most of her time at the cranberry farm. So she really has a passion for educating the public about cranberry farming, which that passion is something that she says comes from her grandfather. And Jen just welcomes people to the farm with open arms. She even literally had me suit up in waders, and I went into the bog itself. And the day I was there was another reporter at the farm, there was a photographer there, and there were even just a couple random people. There was a guy who was taking some drone video and a woman who was just taking some photos. And, a lot of farmers probably are a little hesitant to just let so many people onto their farm, especially during harvest season, which is valid. I understand the hesitancy, but for Jen, she wants to share her family's legacy and teach everyone about the cranberry industry, which not a lot of people know about. I definitely didn't know very much about it. So this season specifically in New Jersey for cranberries was pretty tough due to a lack of rain. They really haven't had any significant rain since early August, and that's impacted cranberry yield. So if you want to read more about the Lee family's harvest, the article is called New Jersey Cranberry Farm Wades Through Harvest Season, and it's available at lancasterfarming.com, and you can watch a video of the whole process as well, both on our website and on our social media channels.
And now let's bring Sue into the farmhouse.
Sue, welcome to the farmhouse. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, did you always want to work in agriculture?
Well, I guess I was born into it, and so it sort of just happened.
All right. Well, can you tell us about your farm?
Farm's been in our family since about the early 1890s. We haven't owned it as long yet as the original people who founded it did. They founded it in 1762. It's 106 acres. Most of it is located in the borough of Cleona, which is kind of odd. Most farms aren't in a borough, they're in a township. I think about 18 acres are located in North Lebanon Township, but my relatives actually founded the borough of Cleona. So that's how our farm got to be part of a borough.
So what is it that you guys farm?
Well, there's 90 acres of cropland, and that is leased to someone who has a lot bigger equipment than we could ever afford. We also have a small beef cattle operation. with maybe 20 or so cattle at a time, cow and calf at this point, probably transitioning to more of a feeder steer type of operation.
So I have been to your farm once, and I actually have driven past it many, many times because I live in Lebanon County. So anytime I'm heading into Annville, I head right past your farm. So I know because I've seen it, it's kind of its own little island of farmland surrounded by, as you said, it's in a borough.
Mhm.
And I know there's a warehouse that butts up against some of your land. So your farm is actually preserved, though, which is, it's kind of tough sometimes to get a farm preserved because of the waiting list and all these different factors. So tell us, like, when you guys got your farm preserved and why that was so important for you.
Well, I believe our farm was preserved in 2002. And we actually became the 6,000th acre in Lebanon County that was preserved. And they had a little ceremony here at our farm at that time. It was very important to us to have our farm preserved because we could see what was coming. Um, you see a warehouse there now, but initially, it was kind of a blank canvas, but it was part of an industrial park. So we knew that was going to become a problem. Fortunately, we have, I guess, or unfortunately, depending how you look at it, but for the purposes of ratings in preserve farms, we have a lot of road frontage and railroad frontage for that matter. So that was, all in our favor, and it was just something we wanted to do, and we have never regretted it.
Hmm. So you said that to get a farm preserved, there's like a rating system. Can you explain that a little bit for people who might not understand?
Well, I'm not an expert on the subject, but I know that things that they take into consideration are the types of soils that you have on your farm, the quality of the farmland from that point of view. And as I said, um, road frontage, which I think is their way of trying to prioritize farms that might be most likely to get gobbled up.
So, how did you decide that you wanted to start writing in addition to farming?
Gee, sort of the same way I decided I wanted, wanted to be in agriculture. I never set out to write for Lancaster Farming exactly. Um, Back in the early 2000s, um, my father had passed away in October of 2000, and I had a lot of stuff that I wished I could share. He spent his last 2 years in a nursing home. And so I wrote this thing like Nursing Home 101, I believe it was called. And then I didn't know what to do with it. And my family had always been subscribers to Lancaster Farming. So I thought, I'll send it to them. Never really expecting it to be taken seriously, I guess. Luann Good got back to me. She was the editor of the B section at that time, and I think that they actually may have published it as a two-part segment because it was so lengthy. Then I think a couple years later, we enrolled some land in CREP program, and while the people were here doing the plantings, I took some pictures and again felt motivated, like I'm going to write about this. Sent it to Luann, and they published it. And then I think that was like in the spring, that fall, Luann contacted me, said, "Hey, there's going to be a Farm City banquet in Lebanon County next week. Would you be willing to cover it for us?" I said, "Well, yeah, I'll give it a try." And so that started my then getting story assignments. And when Ida Risser discontinued writing her column, retired from doing that after many years, they asked me if I would be willing to consider writing a weekly column.
And now we have
And
Rural
now,
Ramblings.
And the rest is
yeah,
history.
yeah. I've always, so, here on staff, there's a handful of us who will write the weekly staff opinion column. And because it's like, there's a bunch of us, I feel like my turn only comes up maybe once every month and a half, once every 2 months. And yet I still find myself struggling to figure out, like, what do I actually want to write about? But you do a column every single week. And I've always wondered, how do you come up with something different to write about every single week?
Well, I think they used to say that the what was the show that they said it was a show about nothing, Seinfeld, and sometimes I feel like my column is about nothing in a way, nothing special. But I like to take little everyday events that I think other people could identify with and write about them. So in that way, I like to think I have some worthwhile content, but in some respects, it is a column about nothing, just the little things more often than the big things.
Yeah. Did you come up with the Rural Ramblings name of the column, or was that one of the editors?
I know that was my idea. They had asked me what I thought we should call it, and I originally I suggested the farmer's daughter, and that was a non-starter with them. And Rural Ramblings was actually the column that was written for many years in the Lebanon Daily News by a man named Leon Miller. Leon Miller what happened to be the father of my best friend in elementary school, and he had since moved on. He had gone to write for Agway at their main office up in Syracuse, discontinued the column, and it had been inactive for, I don't know, probably 20 plus years. And I thought, I like that. That's kind of a catchy name, Rural Ramblings. And so I got in touch with Leon and said, like, hey, what do you think? Would you let me borrow it? And he was amenable to that. And the editor, I thought it was an okay thing. So now it's Rural Ramblings, although some people call it Rural Rumblings.
I feel like Rural Ramblings kind of perfectly fits though your like I write about like everything and nothing. You know, it is
Mhm.
a really good title to encompass whatever you feel like sharing that week. So
I do think it is relatable, even though they are like sometimes really like small things that are happening throughout the day or throughout the week. Like, I feel like it's relatable to a lot of people.
do you have over the years a favorite column that you've written? I'm sure there's like you've
Oh,
written
gee
so many,
whiz.
but
You know, it's funny. People always, well, some of my friends will say, like, what did you write about this week? It's like, oh, geez. I try to write them like a week ahead, and it's like, gee, I can't really remember. You know, I don't know. I like to write about people, interesting people that I've met. Um, the one that is oddly, I don't know if I could say it's my favorite, but oddly was like I remember when one of my mother's friends died, and I wrote about her and her life. And there are a lot of unsung heroes out there. And I, by the way, one of the things when they asked me if I would write a column, I said, well, could I still keep writing stories too? Because I enjoy doing that so much. I meet so many interesting people. The nicest people that I've ever met are people that I met through Lancaster Farming, doing articles about them. Sometimes though, things work out better as a column. So yeah, I like to write about people.
Well, so like you mentioned, you do cover things for us as a correspondent. What are some of your favorite things that you have gotten to cover for Lancaster Farming?
Oh, gee whiz. You always put me on the spot with this. Um, it wasn't, sometimes columns are fun columns to write. Like you probably realize this too, some columns almost write themselves. Like you can hardly wait to get back to the keyboard and get it down, because it's just like flowing. And things like that. Uh, I I'm thinking of recent columns. One I wrote about Rose Murrin, which my column, excuse me, that was a story that ran on Mother's Day, I believe, of this year. And that was a story that was about a woman who was the first female, oh, again, my term is eluding me, master farmer in Pennsylvania. And this was like back in 1942. She was a widow. Her husband had been killed in an accident with a drunk driver, and she was left to raise alone 9 children on the farm. And she made a huge success out of it, won many awards. And a lot of that was through her association with cooperative extension and being willing to adopt what were then very new procedures. And it succeeded very well. And I enjoyed writing about that because I got to meet like her granddaughter, great granddaughter, and that was interesting. And that story I was made aware of Rose Murrin. I'd never heard of her before by a gentleman named Tom Clowney. Coincidentally, Tom Clowney was the story that I wrote last week for the Antique and History section. He's a 93-year-old master farmer in Adams County, and he has a little agricultural museum in his home. And that was such a pleasure to be able to go back and touch base with Tom again.
Yeah. So like you've been mentioning, you a lot of your stories kind of touch on local history.
Mhm.
Why do you think it's important to capture that local history and preserve it in the paper or, in some cases online at lancasterfarming.com?
Yeah. To borrow a phrase from someone else whose name I don't recall, those who do not learn from history are condemned to repeat it. Uh, but usually our local history that I write about, it's not quite that dire, I guess. Um, I just think it's important to keep it alive. You know, a lot of people in Lebanon County, anyhow, were raised here, born and raised here, like I was. But even so, there's so much local history we're not aware of. Um, and then, too, there are lots of people that now there's a more mobility. So there are lots of people that don't know anything about the history of where they're living. And I just think that's a very important thing. And it's interesting, at least to me, and I think other people as well.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I learn a lot whenever I read your stories. The mansions of Cornwall comes to mind. I had no idea there were so many fancy homes in that area.
Well, thank you. Again, bear in mind, I'm not the one that did all the hard work there. That was Sue Wetzel and Mike, and I can't remember his last name right now either. But anyhow, they did all the research for that article, and it was actually a online presentation. So I had the easy part, but that was a fun one to write as well. And it's always neat because even with things like that, there may be some details you want to dig in a little deeper. And I kind of enjoy doing the research when you have it at your fingertips.
Yeah. It makes me wonder, how many people that you've inspired to maybe go out and visit some of these sites that
I
they
hope.
might not otherwise have known about them or they just, didn't think it was worth the time, but maybe if they read that story or other stories like it, like the Union Canal story also comes to mind if they
Yeah.
saw that and thought like, I should check that out and maybe learn a thing or two.
Yeah. Well, the one triumph in that department that I'm aware of is that this is quite a number of years ago. Miller organs were made here in Lebanon County. They were like pipe organs dating back to the early 1800s, I believe. And there was a factory here in Lebanon. And the Lebanon County Historical Society has a very nice collection of them. And I wrote an article about that. And a group from a church in York County that has a Miller organ, the group of them made a field trip to the Historical Society to see their collection, and also made arrangements. Old Salem Lutheran Church has one as well, and they made arrangements so they could go see that organ while they were in town. So that made me feel good.
Very cool. Yeah.
Yeah, that is cool. You know, I will say, Sue, as a reporter here who lives in Lebanon County, I have had so many people, just because I work at Lancaster Farming, go like, "Oh, you know Sue Bowman, right?" And for so many years, I had never actually met you. I just read your stuff and I knew who you were. So it was exciting when I finally got to meet you because now I can actually tell people like, "Yeah, I know Sue, of course."
Well, you'd be surprised how many people say to me, "Oh, do you know so and so at Lancaster Farming?" I'll be like, "No." Uh, like they don't understand that I don't work in an office there. That pretty much my contact with most of you most of the time is through my computer keyboard, both receiving and returning assignments. So I mean, I've obviously met both of you before,
Mhm.
and Kelly as well, my editor. But a lot of times they'll be asking like about salespeople or things like that because
Uh,
we've done ads, and it's like, no, sorry, no.
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess a lot of people outside of the world of journalism don't necessarily understand what correspondents and freelancers do. For us, correspondents are so important to us to have, a good quality paper and have a good variety of stories. But it is interesting to have people who write for our paper that we've never met before. So it's always nice to get to meet our correspondents for real and not just through email. So
Yeah. Oh, it's fun. It's fun for us too. I have to put a face with the name, and yeah, that's that's both the blessing and the curse of long distance writing assignments. Where you're not handing them to the person and maybe lobbying them. Like, I know you probably won't like this part, but I hope you'll leave it in.
all right. So we have one final question for you, and we always joke that we save the big one for last. So, and
Uh-oh.
that is, what does being a woman in ag mean to you?
Hmm. Well, it used to be a lot more of a novelty than it is now. Um, My husband and I often talk about our regrets. My husband's an electrical engineer, and I worked for over 40 years for the local Housing and Redevelopment Authority, which wasn't something I dreamed of growing up to do. In fact, my degree from college is in elementary education, but I like to say that student teaching cured me. Uh, so, but both of us have said that we regret never considering going to college for an ag degree. It just wasn't done back in our day, not to sound like a dinosaur, but and checking back, FFA didn't even start admitting female members until the year after I graduated from high school. Yeah, it just was not a thing. And and in some respects, being a farm kid, although I attended Cleona School District, so there were a lot of other farm kids there too, but it wasn't necessarily something that you advertised to people because it wasn't necessarily A, that unusual, or B, something that to be that proud of. And in fact, this isn't about women, but I guess there's some carryover. My older brother attended Franklin and Marshall College, and when he was in high school, his friends made fun of him, saying that F&M stood for Farmers Mutual. But anyway, you know, so I mean, we regret in some respects we could have had very fulfilling careers in a different area that never even occurred to us because again we kind of I guess took it for granted. But as time goes on, I mean, now you go out and you do a story about FFA, and there are more girls in FFA than there are boys, and there are also a lot more female farm owners. It used to be, you know, if something happened to the husband of the farmer, you know, the wife and you know they sold the farm and moved on, and that doesn't happen as much anymore. You know, with my mother, when my father passed away, you know, we made the decision we were going to stay here, and you know, you don't have to do everything on the farm yourself anymore. You know, it's not like back in the days when you had a few chickens and a few hogs and a few cows and a few steers. Now you can get somebody to maybe house their livestock at your farm. You can get somebody to do the field work for you, lease your cropland. So I guess you know it's just meant you know it's meant a lot to me, and it's something I'm proud of now in my later years to say, yeah, I live on a 106-acre preserve farm.
That is something to be proud
Yeah,
of.
something to
And
celebrate.
it's great that you eventually came to that realization that growing up on a farm and living that farm life is something to be proud of, even though maybe you didn't always feel that way. I think that's very cool to have that perspective shift as you've gotten older.
Yeah, it's interesting now to me to see, you know, to think back in the day, my dad had 12 to 15 dairy cows, and you know, that was a lot. I mean, that was back before the days of bulk tanks. And in fact, that's what got my dad out of dairy farming when they said like, all right, you know, no more milk cans. You got to get, put in a bulk tank and build a wall if you're going to have other animals in the same, you know, different species in the same barn. You got to build a wall. And my dad's like, no, thank you. I think I'm just gonna keep the chickens, the pigs, and the steers and lose the dairy cows. In the same way, you know, back when I was a kid, we had 500 chickens, and that was a lot of chickens. I mean, we got over 300 eggs a day. And so now you look at the, you know, chicken houses, and you know that you can barely see from one end to the other because they're so long. And the same way with dairy farms. I mean, it's laughable to have like 12 or 15 cows when you see, you know, now people count their cows in hundreds, not in tens.
Yeah, definitely has been a lot of changes in agriculture over the years, that's for sure.
And I've been very pleased also to see how not only Lebanon County but other counties in Pennsylvania are moving ahead with farmland preservation, because it's, you know, was it Joni Mitchell? Don't it always seem to go? You don't know what you got till it's gone. You know, and you see the land being gobbled up, and it's very painful. You know, it almost brings tears to my eyes sometimes. You know, you'll see a for sale sign on a tract of land, a farmland, and you look at it, and it's got a cornfield or a wheat field, and you think, I think it's growing its last crop. It's
Yeah.
just very sad to me.
Yeah, we've kind of touched on that before on this podcast that, you know, Pennsylvania has such great land, such great soil.
It's some of the most productive soil in the farm in the United States. Yeah.
Yeah, and it makes you sad to see it, be lost to development.
Well, I should add, unfortunately or unfortunately, I guess, our farm is located within X distance of a electrical transmission site, and so I get multiple letters every month that, do I want to turn into a solar farm? And I don't. I know I'm not opposed to solar. I think there's a place for it. But the other week, Dennis and I were driving somewhere and we saw someone that had a very long chicken house that had installed solar panels on the roof of their chicken house of a quantity that I would assume was perhaps beyond their own usage needs. And it's like, bingo.
Yeah.
There you go. That's a win-win. You got a double header going on there.
Have your cake and eat it too.
Ditto for warehouses. I hate to see them, covering so many square feet. The one next to us, and just to clarify, some people thought we sold our land to them. It was not our property. We would never have done that. But the warehouse beside our farm on the eastern boundary is like 222,000 square feet. And that's a small warehouse. So, hey, maybe those things are very well constructed out of concrete panels and things. Maybe that's a good place to put some solar panels too.
Definitely.
Yeah. Well, Sue, thank you so much for joining us here at the farmhouse today. We appreciate you visiting.
It's been fun. Thank you. It's not my thing to be interviewed. Especially since I've retired. I mean, I had a lot of public contact in my previous job.
We turned the tables today.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is, I mean, I was always a little suspicious of the media because as deputy executive director of the agency, sometimes I would be called upon to be interviewed by local media, and it never ceased to amaze me. Like, I know I didn't say that. I know that they didn't really understand what I was saying. I guess I either didn't do a good enough job of explaining it, or they were in a hurry and they didn't really care. And that's one of the things that's been a guiding light to me when I do stories. I want to make sure I have it right. And I'm sure I become a pain in the neck to some people sometimes, like, don't call me again. But it's very important to me to be accurate.
Absolutely.
So, and that derives from my own personal experiences. People say, or my boss would say to me, why did you tell him that? It's like, I didn't tell him that.
Yeah. No, I mean, accuracy is definitely one of, I think, if not the most important part of journalism, for sure.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. So
yeah,
thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, it was great getting you on. I know we've talked about this with you. I think
almost
it was almost a year ago, and we finally got you on. So that's so exciting.
I think it originated.
Yes, it was at the Christmas party. So glad we finally got you into the farmhouse almost a year later.
Anytime. It was fun.
I loved getting a chance to talk to Sue. It's always so nice to put, a face to a name when it comes to our correspondents. We hear so much from them about, the places they're going and the events that they're covering, and it's kind of nice to hear like the stories behind the stories, so to speak.
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like especially with Sue, we talked to her about coming on this podcast before the podcast ever even launched. So it was definitely very exciting to finally get her on as a guest and hear some of her many stories of her time here with Lancaster Farming.
Yeah, and we really only scratched the surface because Sue has just been prolific here at Lancaster Farming. She has covered so many things, and she's talked about so many things that have happened in her life and on her farm. And again, you can find them all at lancasterfarming.com. We decided to pick out a couple of our favorite Sue Bowman stories from the past couple years and share them with you guys. It's almost like an additional little treat segment at the back end of the podcast. Steph, do you want to start things off with your favorite Sue story?
Sure. So I don't think that it's come up yet on this podcast, but Candace knows I really love goats. I just think they're cute and silly and mischievous, and so no surprise, my Rural Ramblings column from Sue is titled Sheep and Goats Are, quote, garbage gourmets, which I just love that, first of all. So Sue wrote this column back in July of 2023, and it highlights some of the favorite and least favorite snack items of Sue's two goats, Remy and Bianca. So first of all, if you didn't know, goats and also sheep, which Sue also has 2 sheep named Paul and Peter, love eating discarded Christmas trees. So as we're already approaching the holiday season, which is kind of exciting, if you're getting a fresh tree this year, try to maybe find a local farm after the season wraps up that you could donate it to, and it can be a little snack item for their goats and sheep. So back to her column and the favorite and least favorite lists. Sue says her goaty gals, as she calls them, they have a, quote, no thanks list, which I thought was funny. I was so shocked to see that her goats don't like potato peels, which we're very pro potato on this podcast, which if you've listened to us, you know that already. So I was surprised that the goats don't agree with us in our potato stance, but it's okay. But also, Sue's goats are not a huge fan of fruits like grapes, peaches, and citrus peels. And one thing that surprised me was they don't like watermelon rinds, but they love cantaloupe rinds.
Picky.
Right. I feel like that would be if you like one, you like the other.
Yeah.
But apparently not. But the snack that Sue says gets, quote, 2 hooves up is sweet corn husks and cobs. And the gals also really love apples in the fall.
Who doesn't?
Same. I mean, love an apple. But apparently they prefer to be fed their apples by hand. They do seem a little picky, and I love it for them.
Goat divas.
Yeah, so honestly, I would love to go feed the goaty gals some apples by hand. It'd be giving them a treat, and it would be a treat for me to hang out with them. So if you want to read more about Sue's goats and their garbage disposal techniques, it is on our website at lancasterfarming.com.
Well, my favorite Sue story, it wasn't a Rural Ramblings column. I actually picked one that she did this past February called Why Were Victorian Valentines Both Sweet and Sour? And in it, she talks about Valentine's cards from the 1800s and how just over the top they were. Some would include pressed flowers, or even in one case, a small taxidermied bird.
What?
Yeah.
Flowers, yes, I can get behind pressed flowers.
Right, yeah.
I don't know about the bird.
But she also talks about cards that were known as vinegar valentines. Steph, are you familiar with the term?
No, but it scares me.
So vinegar valentines, as the name might suggest, were meant to poke fun at or even insult the receiver, which I find to be kind of hilarious. And one that she includes has this verse written on it. The smile that on your face appears, stretching your mouth to meet your ears. You think, no doubt, as sweet as honey. Whereas, dear girl, it's only funny. And it's accompanied by an illustrated caricature of a funny-looking woman with a giant mouth. And I honestly don't know what I would be more taken aback by. A Valentine's card meant to insult me, or a card with a dead bird meant to charm me. But either way, it's fun to learn about these things. And trust me, if you read Sue's stories about historical items or events, you will always learn something.
Maybe we'll have a new Valentine's Day tradition at the office.
I
Not
feel
the
like
dead bird, though.
We're all going to get sent to HR if we start the vinegar Valentines.
You're right. That's a dangerous move.
Yeah, when I saw it, I was like, I would cry if I got one of these.
Right, like if someone wrote a poem making fun of me, please don't. I'm a sensitive person.
Like, you know me well enough to get me a Valentine, you know this about me. All right, and with that, we can wrap things up. So thank you all for listening. If you like this episode, please consider subscribing if you haven't already done so. And if you really like this episode, please consider leaving us a review.
If you have any questions or thoughts about this episode or the podcast in general, you can email us at farmhouse@lancasterfarming.com.
You can also find us on social media at Lancaster Farming on most platforms.
Thank you again for listening and visiting us here at the farmhouse. I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Candace.
We'll talk to you later.
Bye.
This episode of The Farmhouse is copyright 2024 by Lancaster Farming Newspaper, part of the Steinman Communications family.
It was written by Stephanie Spiker and Candace Worzbowski. It was produced by Eric Herlock. The music you have heard throughout the show is courtesy of Tim Bird's Shadow.